Hey everybody, back again. Mary Beth Martin, 4-H agent for Bedford. So excited to be reading with you guys yet again in Willa of the Wood. I've got my copy ready and I'm going to turn to chapter 11. In my copy, it's on page 52 because we're going to get started where we left off. She struggled against him, but Willa knew she couldn't fight Gredick. She couldn't overpower him. She couldn't strike him with a blow to defeat him. She was far too strong, and with his brutish brother Cedric and the nasty Kiernan and all the other Jaders who followed him, he had far too many allies. As he pressed her up against the rock wall, the jagged edges of the stone jammed into her shoulder blades, driving a slash of pain into her wound. He pushed against her so hard that she could barely expand her chest enough to take a breath. But as the grip of Gredick's fingers slowly squeezed her throat shut, she pushed out a few last words. "Let me speak, Gredick," she wheezed. Gredick leaned his face close to hers and looked into her eyes. "I'm warning you, no tricks, Willa. Don't try to run." "I will not run," she said, her voice thin and raspy through the grip of his fingers. "Swear it," he demanded. "I swear that I will not run," she said. Finally, Gredick loosened his grip on her throat and stepped back away from her. "Now tell me what happened to you last night. Where's your satchel?" At that moment, Willa blended herself into the color and texture of the lichen that clung to the rock. She wove herself so completely into the world around her that she disappeared. Her skin, her eyes, her hair, she vanished. Although they'd seen her do it before, the Farron boys gasped as much in anger as in surprise. Gredick immediately reached out to grab her again, but she had already dropped to the ground and curled into a little ball at the base of the rock. "Where'd she go?" Cedric shouted, sweeping his stick back and forth through the open air where he'd last seen her. "She tricked us," Kieran shrieked. "Just find her," Gredick screamed in frustration as he searched the ground around him. Willa had promised she wouldn't run, and she didn't. She crawled slowly and invisibly away from the Jader boys. They searched frantically for her, flailing their arms around them and poking with their sticks. They stabbed into the ground and jabbed into the trees. They rustled bushes and kicked up dirt, but their efforts were useless. They couldn't find her. Finally, Gredick said, "Come on, she'll have to come back to the lair sooner or later, and we'll catch her then." "We'll catch her then," Kieran repeated, dragging his hand across his nose as they headed off. "The Padawan's going to be burning that she didn't come home last night," Cedric said, seeming to relish the thought. "There's no slinking away from that." "Maybe not," Gredick said, "but whatever we do, we need to get her satchel before she sees the Padawan. She must have something good to be doing all of this." As the Jader boys climbed up through the rocky gorge, following the path that led beneath the Watcher hanging between its stony walls, they finally disappeared into the distance. But she knew she hadn't seen the last of them. They'd be waiting, ready to fill her satchel and drag her empty-handed before the Padawan in shame. Her mama had told her about many of the Jaders had no parents or grandparents to raise them, and that they had lost their way. And just as with the humans, that which the Jaders did not understand, they destroyed, and that meant her. When she was certain the Jaders were well gone and she thought it was safe for her to come out of her hiding place, she climbed back up the giant tree and retrieved her satchel from the woodpecker's hole. She knew it was dangerous to carry it, but she realized now, more than ever, she was going to need it as soon as she returned to Dead Hollow. Just as she began her climb down, she heard voices below her. She gazed from her bird's eye view down into the gorge to see a band of the Padawan's guards winding along the path and going out into the forest. They were moving quickly and with purpose, carrying their spears as well as other equipment she couldn't make out. She'd never seen anything like it. The guards seemed to be in some sort of hunting party, but Farron didn't hunt the animals of the forest. She knew she couldn't make the main path into the lair, so she finally climbed down. Oh, when she finally climbed down, she took one of the side routes, then split off on her own through the steep and rocky forest. She climbed up and over a thicket, strangled ridge, her arm and shoulder hurting all the way. The healing lake of the bears had stopped the bleeding and saved her life, but the jabbing sticks and probing fingers of the Jader boys had reopened the wound. She could feel the sticky blood oozing down her back. Finally, she could see the lair of her people. From a distance, the part of the dead hollow lair that was visible on the surface of the earth looked like a vast hornet's nest with the same rough gray-brown, irregular shape, but instead of being made from the hornet's sticky paper, the walls of the lair were made from a mesh of thousands of interwoven sticks. The walls had once been green and alive, woven together and sustained in life by the wood witches of the Farron past. They had used the same powerful woodcraft her mama had taught her, the same language she used to ask the trees to help her cross the river or intertwine around her when she needed to disappear. But the lair's walls were long dead now, dead for more than 100 years, her mama said. The sticks twisted and rotting, blackened by age, their roots decayed, for the woodcraft needed to keep the walls alive had long faded from the ways of the Farron. There just weren't enough wood witches to keep the lair green and alive anymore. The very name Wood Witch had become a title of scorn, even fear, to many in the clan, and the Pattarian had forbidden the old ways. Willa climbed down into the gorge on the back side of the lair where few Farron ever crept. She found the spot that her mama had told her about, where 3 large rocks had crashed down from the wall of the ravine and left a small triangular hole that looked like nothing more than a crack in the stone. Getting down onto her hands and knees, she crawled inside. The crack became so tight that she had to get down onto her shoulder and wiggle her way along like a centipede. When she finally reached the other side, she crawled out of the stone crack and found herself hunched in a small room enclosed with walls of twisting, wet, rotting sticks. She wrinkled her mouth in revulsion at the dank stench of decaying branches that filled the air. Putrid sludge dripped from the ceiling. This area of the lair had been abandoned for decades and had been strictly forbidden by the Pattarian, too dangerous for members of the clan to enter. Anxious to get out of this wretched part of the lair, she followed a narrow tunnel. It turned and then turned again until she came to a split that led off in several different directions. She picked the one that led upward and kept moving. She had to get home to her mama. The inside of the dead hollow lair consisted of a maze of woven stick tunnels, black and sticky from years of use, that wound through the gullet of the gorge into the small, darkened rooms and secluded caves of her people. It had once been home to many thousands of Farron, but now only a few hundred remained, and there were many dark and empty places like this one left behind. Old storage areas and dens where Farron once lived, filled with nothing but the echoes of those who had come before. The tunnels of the lair connected one to the other like warm holes, twisting and writhing through the earth. As Willa tried to navigate her way back home, the wound on her shoulder began to throb. A wave of dizziness passed through her, and she nearly toppled to the floor. She clutched the wall to catch her balance and rest. When she touched her hand to the wound on her back, her fingers came back bright and slippery with fresh blood. Thanks to the healing lake of the bears, she felt a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. But her wound was bleeding again. If she couldn't find her way through these old tunnels, she was going to die here, and no one would ever know. She had to continue on. She came to a place where the tunnel split into 3 different directions, and she wasn't sure which way to go. She sniffed the air of each tunnel. In the tunnel on the left, she thought she could smell the distant scents of her clan. She hoped it led upward towards the more active parts of the lair, but then she heard a disturbing whimpering sound coming from the tunnel that led down to the right. She stopped and stayed quiet as she tried to identify the sound. It wasn't the wind howling, wrath-like through the empty tunnels like it sometimes did. It sounded more like a wounded animal. When she heard the sound again, fear seeped into her body. She wiped her dry lips with the back of her hand. There was something down that tunnel. She could smell it. She wanted to go in the opposite direction. She wanted to get home. She had to get home. But the sound? It wasn't a whimpering animal. She heard it again. It was a voice. She took a few uncertain steps into the tunnel and cupped her hands behind her ear to focus the sound. She heard something dragging across the woven stick floor. Then she heard something breathing. Her chest began to rise and fall more heavily, pulling air into her lungs. She tilted her head and sniffed. The smell was oddly familiar, but it did not belong here. Not here. Her palms began to sweat. It was the smell of a human. How is that possible? She thought in confusion. That can't be. She took a few more steps down the tunnel towards the noise she had heard. There were woven stick doors on each side with thorny vines binding them shut so that whatever was inside could not get out. As she peered through the lattice of sticks, she realized that there wasn't an actual room on the other side of each door, but a small enclosure, some sort of prison cell. Then she saw, crammed into the hole, closed in by impenetrable woven stick walls, was a small Cherokee boy about 10 years old, staring out at her with wide, pleading eyes. This human boy should not be here, Willa thought. The Farron people did not attack humans. They did not capture humans and hold them prisoner. She wanted to turn away from this. She wanted to run. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was the forbidden part of the lair. If the Patarian's guards caught her here, she'd be in even worse trouble than she already was. And the wound on her back ached. Her arms and legs and her whole body felt weak and clammy from the loss of blood. But she stayed perfectly still for several seconds, just trying to breathe, trying to understand as the Cherokee boy's dark brown eyes stared at her. Why is there a human here, she thought. What are they doing with it? She could see its little brown hands clinging to the door of sticks that imprisoned it. And as she peered deeper into its hole, she saw that it was thin and dirty and bleeding. She felt the stab of a strange and unpleasant emotion twisting in her gut, but she quickly hardened her mind. If it had been an animal or a Farron in the cell, she would have been right to feel sorry for it. But it wasn't. It was a human. Enemy of the clan, murderer of her people. It wasn't a him, it was an it. And she was forbidden to have anything to do with it. Can you help me? It whispered in a weak and desperate voice, wiping the long black hair from its face. She stepped back, startled. She knew that the Cherokees spoke the English words as well as their own, but the sound of its voice frightened her. She could hear the weakness, the fear, the starvation of it. She could hear it all, and she didn't want to hear it. Do you have food? It asked. The creature is starving, she thought in revulsion. It was as if someone had captured a wild bobcat and put it in a cage. No matter what you did with the bobcat, it was still a bobcat. It needed meat to survive. Out in the world, down in the valleys of the dayfolk, where she made her nightly takes, it would never even occur to her to help a human boy, to actually feed one. They were tree killers. How could she help such a beastly little creature? She could not give this boy food. She didn't have any human food to give it. She had never seen or heard of her people taking prisoners, but the Patarian and his guards must have captured this human and put it here for a reason. Something important to the clan. It must be an act of great disobedience to feed it without permission. She knew all of this, and she had no food. It was impossible. I'll eat anything, the boy begged her. I'm just so hungry. Please. Shut your mouth, she ordered it. her mind darting from one thought to another, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then she remembered. There was something in her satchel. She looked down the corridor, first one way and then the other. This must be some sort of prison, she thought, hidden down here in the old parts of the lair. But if it's a prison, there must be guards. She thought the guards might come down the corridor at any moment and find her here, and they'd punish her for her disobedience against the clan. They'd lock her in one of those slimy holes and bind the door shut, like they had with the boy. She could not help this boy. It was impossible. Get what you came for, Willa, she told herself angrily. Get yourself home. But it was no use. She knelt down on the floor. You must stay quiet, she told the boy as she opened her satchel. Watching her hands, the boy nodded obediently. As its little fingers grasped the sticks that imprisoned it, she could see the brown under the fingernails where it had tried to scratch its way out. She could smell the sweat of its body and the blood of its wounds. She reached into her satchel and pulled out one of the lumps she had stolen from the lair of the man. She pushed the crumbly food through the lattice of sticks that separated her from the boy. The boy took the lump gratefully and shoved it into its mouth. She fed it another lump, and it ate the lump even more quickly than the first, for it had learned to trust her, to take whatever she gave it. These are so good, thank you, it said as it chomped the next lump down. Do not speak to me, she said fiercely, her face flaring with red as she suddenly remembered what a foolish thing she was doing. The startled boy pulled back into its cell. Why am I here? He asked. Why have you taken me? Willa's eyes widened with surprise. I haven't taken you, she said. And as soon as she said the words, she felt so out of place, so disobedient, to be defiantly separating herself from the clan in this way. There is no I, only we. There was the clan. There was the us and the them. There was no I. I was a person alone. I was an impossibility. I was something that shriveled alone and died. Only through the cooperation of the clan did the Farron survive. But she had said it, and she had said it strong. I haven't taken you, she had said. She knew she was part of the clan, but she wanted nothing to do with this. You run from humans. You hide from them. You steal from them, but you don't hurt them. You don't do this to them. If you're not one of them, then who are you? The boy asked. The question stuck in her mind like a blow. Who are you? It was the second time a human had asked her that question. My name is Willa, she said, unsure why she was allowing herself to talk to the human at all. The Cherokee boy pressed its face against the lattice of sticks and formed the little window in the door. And now she could see it studying her, looking at the dirt on her arms and legs and the smears of dried blood on her face. You look like you might be pretty hungry too, it said. You should eat some of the cookies. You eat them, she said, pushing the last two through the sticks at it. I will have food soon enough when I get back home. Thank you, it said, as it gratefully ate the last two lumps. My name's Iska. What's going to happen to me? Why am I here? Please help. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the boy's words. Willa jumped to her feet. The prison guards were coming. We'll stop there for today at the end of chapter 12, and next time we'll pick up at chapter 13. Look forward to reading with you again.